Good morning, Oldsmobile fans. Okay, here in the shop today, as you can see, this is the Oldsmobile small block 350 diesel DX block to gasoline conversion going forward. And what we're up to today is we've got a new pair of aluminum cylinder heads that we're using for the build. And I imagine that a lot of you fellas out there are considering buying these. These are not the Edelbrock. These are the Procomp or Speedmaster 79 parts, and the price is certainly right. Probably about half the Edelbrock. And so today I just want to offer an informative video with a quick appraisal of the out-of-the-box quality, take some measurements for you, and a lot of the specs are not published before you buy these. Only a few of the basics are known, so I'm going to show you and try to save you some money. Sometimes you buy parts ahead of time and you end up returning them because the aftermarket parts don't always work, or worse yet, you assemble the thing on faith and something bad happens because of it, because you made assumptions. So let's go through and talk about it. There are a couple of major issues I want to identify right away. Nothing necessarily wrong, but something you need to be aware of. Okay, a couple of things. First of all, just as when you assemble an entire engine, you want to buy your push rods last. I think this is something most builders find out through experience, because to get the push rod and valve train geometry correct, you don't necessarily know what length push rod you're going to need, so you buy that last. With cylinder heads, it seems like this is a lesson I have to learn once a year. Buy your springs last. You assume there are so many spring specs to be taken into consideration when you order springs, and you're thinking about what the cam needs, obviously. So you think, okay, what's my seat pressure need to be? What's my open pressure need to be? What are my physical dimensions? Is it a 1.25 spring? Is it a 1.4 something spring, or something even bigger? What kind of spring do I want? Single with a damper, dual with a damper, or triple? What's it going to take to do the job? Or do I need a beehive or something like that? And you get so many things to think about there. So when I placed an order, I ordered the springs that spec'd up at what the cam needed, and then come to find out, and I've seen this before with a stock cylinder head that comes back from the machine shop when they recut the valve seats. They change the installed height of the spring, which dictates your pressures, or your poundages, I should say. Same thing here. They gave me a head, or they sold me valves, I should say, that were longer than stock by 100 thousandths, and I have a stock valve, intake valve, sitting here somewhere. Oldsmobile valve stems are short, as you know. The overall length of an Oldsmobile valve is something like 4.75, and these are 100 thousandths longer, so that gives you more installed height. So I've got a retainer sitting here with some locks, and the way you check those, right, is I take an inside. There are a couple of ways to do it, but I just take my inside micrometer. I need 3 hands here to show you, and I check the overall height there. And so here's the number, right? The installed height for these heads with Speedmaster parts is 1.9 inches. All right. Now that's LS territory. As a matter of fact, even if I shimmed them up 100,000, which is quite a bit, I'm still going to get 1.8. Now the valve springs that I had bought, I think these are milling springs. These are meant to be installed at 1.65 as on a stock head. So I'm not taking that into consideration. I can't use these springs, even though dimensionally they're correct and they will assemble. If I didn't check them, I'm not going to have hardly any pressure on the seat. They're just not going to work. I'm going to be floating my valves. So now I need to go back and decide whether I want to use more like a small block Chevy spec spring. But this is going to hold me up again, right, while I'm waiting for parts. So you want to buy those last, right? That's my point. Now, the other big issue that I just want to mention, this is kind of a controversial subject, but before you go out and buy these, I have heard from more than one engine builder, not specifically about Speedmaster or these heads, but about aluminum heads in general, and about offshore heads specifically. There is a concern with the valve seats popping out of the head, right, because they're pressed in, and if the QC is not there, well, you can imagine what would happen, right? Let's take a look at the chambers here. You guys can imagine what would happen if a valve seat pops out of a running engine because it's not swedged in there properly, or whatever term they use, at high RPMs. You're not just going to lose a valve or a seat, or even the whole head. You smack a piston, something binds in there, you could end up losing the whole bottom end of the engine. And so there are fellas out there who've got deep pockets who are saying, I will not buy the Chinese hardware, I will not buy the Chinese cylinder heads, I just won't do it. And of course, I think we'd all prefer to keep the jobs in this country. We know that. We prefer to buy American-made products. Something you have to realize about companies like Eagle and Edelbrock, I mean, some of these things are being cast raw overseas anyway, and then brought into this country and machined. I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but just because something says made in the USA doesn't mean that it's entirely made in the USA anyway, okay? Again, we'd all prefer that it was made in the USA. But just down to a practical matter, what I'm going to say is this. I'm rolling the dice. You always are rolling the dice with any aftermarket part that you buy. We all know they need to be modified. They need to be checked, no matter who made them. With these overseas heads, the price was low. They appear to have pretty good QC in them, but I'm not sure just with my eye. I will talk about them and do some measurements. I'm going to roll the dice and use these in this build for one specific reason, and that is the cam that I chose and the build that I'm doing is a low RPM, low torque street engine. I'm not going for horsepower. I don't even think about horsepower. I'm thinking about how much torque can I make on the bottom end in the, let's say, 1,000 to 4,000 RPM range. This engine's never going to see the high side of 5,000 RPMs. And for that reason, I don't need to run a lot of seat pressure with my valve springs. So I'm not really worried about, my lift is very reasonable. It's below 500 thousandths. As a matter of fact, it might be below net. It might be below 450 thousandths in the end. And so I don't think I'm going to be beating up these seats enough. Who knows what story I'll be telling a year from now, but I don't think I'm going to be beating these seats enough to pop out a seat. So, but you just want to be aware of that as an issue because, and in this case, because of the installed height, even with the Viton seal in it, I could probably hit 800 thousandths lift if I wanted to put that big of a cam in these things. Right, so that's a good thing, of course, for you guys who like big camshafts and want to go racing, is that the thing will physically bolt together and work with your big solid roller cam. Would I do that? No, because I'm worried about the seat issue. If I'm running that big of a cam and wanting to go that fast, I'm going to take my money and I'm going to go to a little older and more respectable cylinder head company with my business. But I think for this application, these might just work. And they actually look pretty good. They kind of surprised me. So let's go through them a little bit, and I'll give you some of the numbers that you're going to want to know about. Okay, the chambers are spec'd at 77 I haven't actually double checked them, but they're spec'd at 77 cc's. So that's big block size. You try to put these on most small blocks with the dish pistons, Oldsmobile, and you're going to end up with something you could put a blower on, you know, at a very low compression ratio, static compression ratio of 7.5 or maybe even less. The way that I'm able to get away with bolting these on a small block 350 is because my pistons are flat top. I talked about this in my other video, and they come 10 thousandths out of the deck, and they have a very small valve reliefs of about 4 cc's. So these 77 cc chambers are going to end up giving me, in my specific case, about a 9.2 to 1 static compression ratio, and that works perfectly with a cam that I'm going to use. I'm going to get, my computer tells me I'm going to get about 200 psi cylinder pressure, which is awesome, you know. And matter of fact, I wouldn't want to go over that, even with the aluminum. So that's an issue for you guys too. You want to run on a small block, it's going to be hard to make the compression. Okay. Cylinder head bolts, we all know Oldsmobile use 2 sizes. They use a 1/2 inch and they use a 7/16. I have already bought the ARP for an Edelbrock application cylinder head head bolts, and they do come through at the proper length, so that's not going to be an issue. Now, these are drilled through for both. It's kind of odd to say it, I don't know if you can see that with my camera, for both 7/16 and a 1/2 inch head bolts. How do they do that? Well, they leave a shelf, right? So this side comes through at 1/2 and the other side comes through at 7/16. So all I need to do, I don't need to go to a machine shop with these to do it. Since I need 1/2 inch head bolts, here's a 1/2 inch bolt right here. This came out of the bottom end, but you can see it's going in, and then it stops when it hits the shoulder. So all I need to do is get a 1/2 inch drill bit and clearance that the entire way, carefully with my hand drill, and I'll have what I need. So that's a good feature these have that I'm not sure the Edelbrocks have. Okay. As far as the rest of the bolt holes go, just in passing, I want to mention, okay, here are your exhaust bolts for your manifold or header. Those are helicoiled, all right? So you don't have to worry about stripping out the aluminum. Now, on the end, the accessory bolt holes for your power steering, your alternator brackets, that kind of thing, are not helicoiled. So you're going to have to be a little more careful. Let's take a look again at the top. Got your bronze valve guides. This is the Chevy Pontiac type non-pedestal system where you're going to use rocker studs, and they're adjustable, of course, so that's fine. A lot of guys convert to those anyway. These are helicoiled. Okay, now I don't know why I assumed it, but when I ordered my rocker studs, I got the 3/8 bottoms, and they're not 3/8, they're 7/16. So that means they're stronger and they won't flex as much. There's a 7/16 bolt right there. So these specs are not published, so you don't know. Okay. Bronze valve guides are 530 thousandths, not 500 thousandths. And the valve seats, or pockets I should say, are very deep, and that's part of why I'm getting such a big installed height. But these are the 1.5 inch valve pockets. So you can fit a pretty good spring package in there. Let me measure the ports, just port dimensions for you really quick. I think the intake ports are 177 cc. They're street size. I mean, they're not huge. They're going to give you some good velocity. But let me just give you some of these measurements with my vernier real quick, just so you know. Okay, exhaust ports, that's 1.410 or so wide. I'm going to the inside of the port, not the part that they've chamfered on the outside. And height is 1.265 or so. These are a little rough. They're not 100% square. It's a bit of a rectangle. And I'm not sure how that compares to stock measurements. I'm just giving them to you raw. By the way, I'm going to go to the intake ports now, but just in passing, I want to note that the spark plug orientation is angled spark plugs. That they're angled toward the exhaust valves. So you've got two going that way, and the other two are going that way. They don't interfere. They're not like a Chevy with the exhaust manifolds up here. I can't see that being a problem of any kind for anybody. Just kind of a performance look. Okay, let's measure the intake ports.